Hi there, I'm Nancy Nash with Starfish Strength, and today I want to share a recipe with you for a healthy, meatless meat sauce. So full disclosure, I do eat meat, but I also really appreciate the nutritional quality and the flavor of a lot of vegetarian recipes and products. In today's recipe, we're going to use textured soy protein in place of our meat. And this is something I discovered when I went vegetarian for a bit. It's very affordable. It just takes a little creativity and know-how to make it taste great. So for our other ingredients, we're going to be using about 10 ounces of fresh washed mushrooms, 2 sweet bell peppers, color of your choice, 2 green peppers. Now you can make these green bell peppers. I'm using poblanos, which are going to be a little spicier. If you wanted even more spice, you could use something like a Hatch chili or an Anaheim chili. So you can kind of decide depending on how much spice your household likes. 1 medium sweet onion, a 12-ounce can of crushed tomatoes, and a 6-ounce can of tomato paste. I'm using the unsalted tomato paste just to keep the sodium down in this recipe. You can always add more salt later on. So on its own, our textured soy protein doesn't have a whole lot of flavor, but that also means it's really good at taking on flavor. So we're going to use a lot of herbs and spices today. So I've got some fresh basil and parsley. You could always substitute dried if you don't have fresh herbs. And then I'm going to use approximately 2 tablespoons of garlic powder, Italian seasoning, and fennel seed. You can add more or less depending on your taste preferences. And if you want to make this even spicier, I do like putting a little bit of crushed red pepper in it, but you could also just serve that as a condiment for those that like spice at the end, which is what I'm going to do. So I'm sharing my favorite way to make this with you, but I've made it a whole bunch of different ways. So if you don't have basil on hand, you could totally use oregano. If you don't have a fresh onion, you could use some onion powder. So just use what you have on hand. We're going to use an 8-ounce package of textured soy protein today. I know it does come packaged in a variety of ways. Mine came out to about 4 cups. So as long as you have about 4 cups, this recipe should work for you. I've also seen textured soy protein called textured vegetarian protein. I know Bob's Red Mill has a version of TVP, so you could also use that instead. So let's talk for a moment about what you're going to want to serve this with, because I'm actually going to get one of those things started right now. So I like to enjoy this over spaghetti squash. It's definitely a little bit sweeter and squashier than eating it with pasta, but I do get the nutrition from the squash, and it's just a personal preference. You're going to want to set your oven on 400 degrees Fahrenheit or about that. I know no oven is exactly what it says it is, and then it will take anywhere from 45 minutes, maybe to an hour to get fully fork tender. So you can kind of see how it's just really coming apart into spaghetti strands really easily. And then while that cooks, we're going to make our sauce. I'm also going to make a protein pasta option. That's often what my husband will have this with. Now, these days, there are a lot of protein pasta options on the shelves. The closest to like real pasta, talking like a good quality box pasta, hinting at a fresh pasta, I would say is Brahmi. But there are definitely some runners up that we keep on hand in our household because they're great nutritionally. And sometimes it's just nice to have variety. If you're looking for a way to boost your protein and fiber, these are a great choice. So we're going to start by chopping up our vegetables before I even turn the heat on. Full disclosure, I am not the best person at cutting things. I'm just going to try to do a pretty good job for you and maybe give you a couple tips that I didn't know when I first started chopping things. All right, make sure you protect the fingers. I'm going to just chop the 2 ends off the onion and give him a little score down the center. And then I will be able to peel his little peel off. Now, sweet onions are a little nicer than some onions to work with because they don't make you cry too much. If you have a kid that likes to help in the kitchen, this might actually be a job that they're open to. And then now my onion has a nice flat end, so I'm gonna put that flat end on my cutting board, slice them in two, and then I'm just gonna start giving myself slices here. My dicing is a little more rustic. You can always run a knife through some of it again to get it a little finer. And then when you get it diced to your liking, we're just gonna put it in a bowl here, just so we can easily transfer things in a couple moments. I do want to just make sure that my peppers are clean. Sometimes there is dirt that gets caught up by the stem, so just make sure you rinse that out. Now, I've learned a few different ways to cut peppers. I'm just going to show you my favorite. So I like actually cutting off the end and then being able to pull the stem out, and then I'm just going to cut kind of a little ring there. And sometimes you can get the seeds out all in one go. It's one of those weird kitchen things that makes me feel accomplished. So just to the best of your ability. I am a person that really doesn't like food to go to waste. So I'm going to cut all that up and make sure it goes in our sauce. This is another fun kid job. Once there are a few seeds in here, you can actually kind of hit the side of it and almost make some like a musical instrument type noise, getting all the seeds out. I really liked cooking as a kid. I was not particularly skilled with a knife or even at cooking for that matter. I just really liked the idea that a whole bunch of things could come together and magically make something new. So basically all my childhood cooking was like science experiments. Some of them worked and some of them didn't, but that's precisely how I wound up at this recipe too, because I had never worked with textured vegetable protein before. I was just trying out some new meatless products and it was really affordable and it seemed interesting. All right, so now that I've got all of our peppers gutted here, I'm gonna just slice up the tops first. Now, if there are a couple seeds in there, they're not gonna hurt anybody. Just to make sure if you do have someone that really doesn't like the texture of seeds, that you remove as many as possible. And in the case of the poblano or hotter pepper, those are actually gonna add some heat. So there is reason to remove those if you're a person that really doesn't like heat. Okay, so now I'm gonna slice the pepper in half and then I'm gonna slice it into thin, hinting at julienne slices. It does really make it easy to slice it down like that. And I'm gonna cut each of those into little cubes. So rustically dicing everything here. All right, since I'm also a personal trainer and I'm very much into healthy movement patterns, I do want to just point out what happens to some of us cutting with our shoulders, because it happens to me too still. So you might find that you actually kind of hunch your shoulder forward as you cut. It's actually better for you to think more about kind of rolling your shoulder back than continually rolling it forward, because you're going to wind up with a really tight neck, tight upper shoulder, and tightness in the front. Now, I do have some great rolling videos on how to relieve that, but prevention is even better than that. I kind of like using like a yellow pepper or something like that because there's so many different fun colors going on here by the end. If you haven't realized already, I really do like color. I think it makes things more fun to eat. Now you could totally chop these up the day before if you wanted to. I'm definitely a fan of food prepping when you have time. So maybe you just have time to cook it. You could chop these up. You could even freeze them and then take them out and make this, and that would work just fine. Mushrooms even freeze really, really well. I've also frozen this sauce after it's been made in portions, and that works really, really well. Just some more options for you to consider. I know we all have nights when it's just not an option to cook something, and rethinking our fast food options, having some fast food options that you can go to that you know are healthy is a real big key in long-term healthy eating in my view. I'm going to point out one more of my movement blenders. So I tend to be really right-sided. So sometimes I'll kind of shift my hip to the side, even lean to the side. If you ever tend to have tightness in your hips or your ankles, let yourself shift your weight to one side, let yourself shift your weight to the other side, maybe do a little bit of the suck and tuck just to make sure your lower back's protected. I know most of us don't think about that when we're cooking, but if you're doing like, a lot of holiday cooking, or you're a person that just likes to cook, thinking about your posture in the kitchen really does help a lot. All right, so slicing my mushrooms, I'm just gonna slice them 1/4 of an inch thin or so. And if you have people that really don't like the texture of mushrooms, you could leave them out. You could dice them up, which is going to be a lot less detectable because they're going to be similar to the textured vegetable protein in texture. Or you could also substitute eggplant. I've done that and that works out really great too. Eggplant and mushrooms have really good nutritional value. They're both vegetables that pack a punch of protein and fiber. So even though we're using the textured soy protein as our source of protein here, the vegetables are definitely adding in their fair share too. So you're going to get lots of servings of vegetables, lots of servings of whole foods with this. I honestly was not a huge vegetable eater growing up. As I tried different vegetables, I discovered that I really liked vegetables, but I didn't always like the way they were prepared. Learning to prepare vegetables in different ways that you really enjoy, I think, is another one of those things that's key to wanting to eat whole foods. Because I can force myself to eat things that are healthy for me for a time, but eventually I really need them to taste good in order to want to do it for the long run. So the closest thing I've had to real Italian food is in the north end of Boston. There are some really great places for seafood and pasta. I don't think this is a substitute for any of those. I still think that those have their place in my treat meal schedule, but this is really nice to be able to just throw together a healthy meal and know that I'm getting good nutrition and it does taste pretty good. I also know the environmental footprint of not always relying on animals as a source of protein is important for the longevity of our world. All right, we've got a nice pile of chopped vegetables here. So I'm going to chop up our parsley as well. So I would just recommend giving this a rinse and just kind of going through the leaves, just pulling out any yellow ones you see. And I'm going to cut off the last 1.5 inches here because those stalks are pretty stiff and sometimes the ends are even dried out. You know, if they still seem pretty thick, then you want to just kind of pull some leaves off and throw out that thick part. But if your parsley have pretty thin stalks, then you can just really finely slice them. And they're going to cook alongside our veggies, so they're going to have plenty of time to absorb liquid and saute and get really nice and soft. So adding in fiber, but not adding in crunch. Not a crunch you want. All right, so once this is chopped to your satisfaction, we're going to add the vegetables and the parsley to our pan. Now, I'm not actually going to use any oil for this. When I started cooking, like for realsies, I would say, and learning techniques from the Food Network, from other recipe guides, I started adding a lot of oil and salt to things. I'm not going to add either of those today. You can add some if you want. I think this has pretty good flavor without those elements, and I'm curious to hear what you think. So I'm going to add most of our basil at the very end. So I'm going to break off this part of the stalk because just like the parsley, unfortunately, it's going to be really dried out and it's not going to be great to eat. But I'm going to chop up the rest of the stems really fine and throw them in there because that is one of the things that I learned. You can eat the basil stems and they actually come out a lot more tender than parsley stems and they'll give it basil flavor. So I'm just going to get a few of them together here, just finally slice them, and then just reserving the leaves for the end. I purposefully bought some really good looking basil for this. I have eaten basil when it's, just starting to get spotted, even from our garden, and it is okay to eat. It's obviously a lot more fun to eat really good looking food. Once you've got your little pile of basil stems, we're going to add those in as well. And then I'm going to turn my burner on to medium high. I'm going to just stir everything a little bit here, just so we've kind of got it semi-mixed so that it cooks approximately at the same rate, and then place our lid on. And because these are pretty water-dense vegetables, they're going to release quite a bit of water. It will definitely start cooking like this and not stick to the bottom of the pan, as long as you monitor the heat and just keep coming back every few minutes to give it a stir. So our vegetables have been simmering for about 5 minutes, so I'm going to give them a quick stir here. Again, just kind of making sure that things are cooking evenly, so you can kind of fold in from the outer edges. I definitely do like using a really big pan to make this. A cast iron skillet would work really well. They heat really evenly, even though they take a little time to heat up. And then something fun I learned about cast iron is that it will release just a little bit of iron into your food. It doesn't really flavor it like iron, but it does give you a little nutritional boost. So if you tend to be a little bit low on your iron, definitely consider cooking with a cast iron skillet. Okay, so everything's starting to saute. So I'm just going to combine our spices because we're going to add those in about 5 more minutes. So as I said in the beginning, I'm just going to use about 2 tablespoons of each of these. You could use more or less depending on your personal preference. And because this is vegetarian, you can taste it at some point and decide if it needs more. This is a good starting point in my opinion, because even though this doesn't look like that much meat, it actually is going to absorb a lot of liquid and be quite a bit of sauce. This is going to make 8 to 10 good sized servings depending on how hungry the people eating it are and what their nutritional needs are. So the fennel seed is kind of the secret ingredient here. Well, it's not a secret anymore. My husband puts fennel seed in his lasagna. I guess I'm sharing family secrets now. Anyway, it really does make it taste a little sausagey and really good. If your family really does like the taste of sausage, you may really find that this is like your new favorite thing to add into dishes where you want that flavor. Our vegetables are looking really nice, really pretty, bright with color. They're releasing a lot of liquid at this point. So just making sure you're continuing to stir, make sure everything gets cooked as evenly as possible. And if you find that, it's releasing an excessive amount of water, like more than just kind of coating the bottom, then you might want to turn it up a little bit. If you feel like things are sticking to the bottom, then you want to turn it down just a little bit. Again, not the world's best cook here, just trying to help you where I've gone wrong in the past. So obviously something like this is a little bit more a labor of love than like a 10-minute recipe. But again, like being able to have leftovers that will taste really good for days to come. Sometimes stuff like this tastes better second day, I think is totally worth it. As we said, being able to freeze a couple portions too. So then you have like a quick variety of things that you can pull out, I think is key in keeping healthy eating feeling interesting. Because if food stops feeling interesting, I'm less likely to want to engage with the plan. As we said, you should just have kind of barely a coating of water on the bottom. Again, this is like one of those things that I've tried to perfect over time, because sometimes I've made a really runny sauce and sometimes I've made a really thick sauce. By reducing the water in the vegetables first, we're kind of concentrating the flavor. However, I'm not fully cooking them. After about 20 minutes, you should find that your vegetables have drastically reduced in size at this point by maybe like a third. This is where I'm going to add in our spices. We're actually going to introduce that vegetable protein, and we're going to add in both our crushed tomatoes and the tomato paste and some water. So I'm going to add in my textured vegetable protein first, and really that's just to get it kind of mixed in with everything, because it's going to start immediately absorbing liquid. It's very, very dry. You can try one of these. It's totally safe, but as like a really dry cracker, it's fairly flavorless, but it really is packed with protein. And again, if you have a friendly helper in the kitchen, maybe they want to open the cans for you. Great practice for grip strength, dexterity, right? So now I'm going to add our tomatoes. So you can use a little spoon to get the tomato paste out, or you could use a tiny spatula. I think the spatula works the best probably. Now, if you don't like a really tomatoey sauce, you could put in less tomato paste than I am for sure. But this really does give it that rich tomato flavor. So I really enjoy fresh tomatoes, but I will say that canned tomatoes are delicious and really, really affordable. More affordable lately, I think, than buying a can of tomato sauce. And we have a couple brands of tomato sauce that we really enjoy buying, but I mostly buy them when they're on sale. And we often make tomato sauce just because these are such a good price. I'm a person that thinks quite a bit about that. I grew up in a big family, so I will math out what this comes out to per serving, because honestly, I'm really curious. I know this is a very affordable meal, So once you've added your tomatoes and your tomato paste, you're going to want to immediately add 4 cups of liquid because, again, this is going to start absorbing things really fast. So you could pour a little bit of your 4 cups of liquid into the tomato cans. I like to do that. And then just make sure that you get all of that tomato flavor out of there. And now they're ready for recycling. If it turns out that your textured vegetable protein didn't need 4 cups of water, you can cook this sauce for a little bit longer and you really aren't going to change the texture of it. It's not like chicken where it's going to feel like gummy and overcooked. I try not to cook it forever because I still want a little texture in the vegetables. I still want the nutrition from the vegetables. And then if you find that you don't have enough water, which I think may be the case for me, because maybe I cook the vegetables a little bit longer in the beginning than I did another time, you can always add in a little bit towards the end. But we'll kind of see where we land as this combines. And you can probably already tell that it really is just soaking up all of that liquid, but all of that tomato flavor too. Deciding that this is done means that the vegetable protein is tender all the way through, so it doesn't have a crunchy center, that this looks about the thickness that you'd like it to be. So for me, I would say this is pretty good. I also mentioned that I still like it when the vegetables have a little bit of texture to them. If you know that people in your family don't love vegetables and you want to cook it a little bit longer, feel free to do so. But I would just turn it down to low, just so you're not evaporating the water too quickly as it cooks. And then if you need to, obviously add another cup of water if you're going to be cooking it for 5 or 10 minutes longer. But to me, at this stage, it looks pretty good. So I'm going to turn the burner off. All right, now that we've shut the heat off on our sauce, this is a great time to start the water for our pasta. So while that's coming to a boil, I'm also going to check our spaghetti squash. So you can see they've browned up nicely. So you'll know they're done when they kind of squish on the surface a little bit like that. So give them a chance to cool. And after about 20 minutes, you can flip them over. You can scoop out the spaghetti strands. So while we're waiting for that to cool, we're going to chop up most of our basil and add it to the cooling sauce. So I'm going to chop up about half of our basil leaves here. So just like a good bunch. Again, it kind of depends on how much you like basil. If you're a person that knows how to chiffonade and kind of roll them together and make those delicate little slices, that would be nice in here. But do your best to give it one slice so you don't bruise it too much. And then I'm just going to stir that into the sauce, just incorporating everything. And you can still see the bright yellow from the peppers. It really is really pretty to look at. So the longer this has to sit, the more sure you'll be that the textured vegetable protein is not going to be crunchy in the center. But just to be sure, let's go ahead and taste it. It's always good to taste your work. That's pretty good. I think I'm going to add a little bit of black pepper, but I can really taste the fennel. If fennel is kind of a new ingredient for you, you might want to put less than 2 tablespoons. But if you know that you really like fennel flavor or you really like sausage flavor, then putting in the 2 tablespoons, you're going to be a very happy camper. And then this would also be a good time if you feel like this should be salted. You could add a little bit of salt as a salt substitute. I would recommend that you try just a little bit of lemon juice because lemon and lime actually hit the palate in the way that salt does. That was a learning curve for me. So sometimes I do find that putting a little bit of citrus in a recipe makes me want to put less salt in. So give it a try and let me know what you think. So if you're going to squeeze directly in there, you definitely want to make sure there's no seeds. Otherwise, make sure you use a juicer. I'm just going to put a little bit in, probably about a tablespoon, because I'm really not trying to make this lemony. So our pasta water is still heating. So while that's happening, I'm going to turn over our spaghetti squash so you can see that they're pretty flexible and you can almost see the strands. It's really cool. The first time I learned about this, I didn't realize there's literally no work. I don't have to put this through some sort of fancy grate or something to create this. This is just how the squash is when you roast it. Pretty darn cool, huh? I've tried zucchini noodles and a couple different squashes that were made into noodles, but nothing that's quite this easy. And I'm just going to scrape all my spaghetti squash into a bowl here. Let me know if you do try roasting this, what you think of this as a flavor combination. Because again, it's not like pasta. It is like eating it with squash. But if you're a squash fan, this might be a new favorite for you. All right, so now that our water is boiling, I'm going to add some of our spaghetti. So this says 8 to 10 minutes on the package. I would say it's been closer to 10 minutes for me. This definitely takes a little bit longer than traditional box spaghetti, but it's definitely worth the extra time. The texture is really great. Obviously, how much you're making is going to depend on how many hungry mouths you're feeding tonight. I want to plate a little bit of this up so you can see what it looks like. So I've got some of my spaghetti squash here. I often put peas in the microwave and use those kind of as an additional element of texture and flavor. So that's exactly what I'm going to do right now. So we're going to put a little bit of our sauce on top of the spaghetti squash and peas. Now, obviously, this is completely vegan still. I do think this is really good and really flavorful. I would not say that this tastes like chicken. I would say it's closer to chicken than it is to beef in texture, but I would not try to pass this off as chicken. I did have someone try to pass tofu off as chicken to me when I was younger, and I enjoyed the tofu, but I didn't find that it tasted like chicken. So I think it's kind of its own thing, but it does have a little bit of a chew to it in the same kind of satisfying way that chicken does, and more like chicken than tofu, I think. Again, if you try this, I would love to know what you think of the flavor, what you think of the texture. I'm a person that really likes texture in food, so I'm kind of thrilled that I enjoy the texture of this. I'm going to add a little bit of Parmesan cheese. That's completely up to you. I'm also going to add a little bit of basil, and I'm also a person that really likes heat, so I'm going to add just a little bit of crushed red pepper. I remember I first had crushed red pepper on pizza because my grandpa really liked it on pizza, and my dad did not like spice at all, and I had never even thought of making pizza spicy. It was so good, and I really like crushed red pepper at this point. So it might not be strictly Italian, but it's one of those American Italian things that I enjoy very much. Okay, so now I've got some more flavor elements to consider here. Yeah, that is just, for me, packed with flavor. You've got some saltiness from the cheese, you've got some heat coming off the chili pepper, and then you have that really fresh taste of basil. And I really think that Parmesan and basil is a winning combination, whether or not you like pesto. So I hope you give this a try. Thanks so much for cooking with me today. I hope you learned something that you can use to support your nutritional goals and your wellness journey. Please feel free to check out the rest of my channel. Let me know in the comments what parts of this helped you, what questions you still have, and maybe what topics you'd like me to cover next. Thanks again. I'll see you next time. Called Textured Vegetarian Protein, or TVP. All right, let me get your bone, okay? I'll be right back. We'll keep it right here. I'm also Dr. Phil fan. You'll really know when they're done when you kind of poke them, probably with a fork, but yeah.
Put it done?
No, I'm poked it with my finger because it's not actually hot.